Two sisters were killed just days apart in two separate tragedies. Karen Garcia was a 21-year-old mother from California. She had a 2-year-old child with her ex, Salvador Garcia Jr., who she had been with previously for 9 years. On the 7th of January 2018, Karen's sister Jessica was tragically killed in a car accident. Jessica was only 19 years old when she had been traveling from a Denny's near her home. 4 of her friends were also killed with her in the car. When Karen vanished 2 days later, family felt it may have been related to her sister's death. They wondered if she was just really struggling mentally and needed some time to be on her own. However, her already grieving family were dealt another horrifying blow when police started searching Karen's home. She was reported missing and police had to tell the family that they had reason to believe that she had been killed. Police immediately had a suspect, and it was her ex, Salvador. Word actually got out that police were hunting for him and he went on the run. Salvador's neighbour reportedly saw Karen on the 8th of January when she'd been collecting her things. She'd been in the process of moving things out of that apartment and the neighbour never saw her again. The following day, the neighbour said that he went inside of the apartment and saw a big red stain. There was also blood spatter on the walls and drawers, so he rang police. Investigators also discovered drag marks at the property, indicating that a victim had been removed from the house. Tragically, Karen's body was discovered in her own car in a car park in Colusa. She was, quote, in the driver's seat of her car in a reclining position with her face down and obscured by her hair. She was covered with a sweater and had her charging cell phone perched on one hip to appear as if she was napping. The autopsy showed that she died from blunt force trauma to her head. Police were working on a theory that Salvador may have killed Karen because he couldn't accept their breakup. Frustratingly, due to him being on the run, it would take over a year for police to track him down in Mexico. In August 2019, they managed to arrest him and he was transferred back to California. There, he was charged with Karen's murder. In court, texts were revealed between the pair that showed that Karen had broke up with him. He was refusing to accept the fact that things were over. In 2020, he pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and got 25 years in prison.
The allegations against former Drake and Josh star Drake Bell are disturbing. And they aren't just allegations, he actually pled guilty to a felony charge, so let's take a look. So if you don't know who Drake Bell is, he's a former child star who was huge on Nickelodeon in the 2000s. He first was seen on The Amanda Show with Amanda Bynes, and then rose to the mega stardom category when he was in the show Drake and Josh with Josh Peck. Now, Drake Bell's first brush with the legal system came when he was arrested for a DUI. And this was kind of a massive moment in the media because it showed that Drake Bell was now an adult. He wasn't the beloved child star, and he was subject to real legal action if he messed up. But the Drake Bell story took a grim and disturbing turn when in 2021 he was arrested on some scary charges. He was arrested on child endangerment charges and disseminating material harmful to juveniles charges. So, according to authorities, Drake Bell had sent a 15-year-old girl inappropriate messages over social media in the months leading up to a concert that he was performing. And then, according to the authorities, at the concert, he endangered the child in some way. Now, keep in mind that at the time, Drake Bell was in his 30s and this girl was 15 years old. And disturbingly, just a month after he was arrested and these charges were filed, Drake Bell's accuser made a public appearance and stated that he had SA'd her. Keep in mind, this assault took place when the girl was underage. But shockingly, Drake Bell actually pled guilty to the initial charges before the girl came forward and said that he had assaulted her. So he didn't try to deny that he had been messaging this minor, he just said that it had happened, and after he admitted guilt, he was given 2 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. Now, as if all of this isn't disturbing enough, a child star that went on to exhibit some form of pedophilic behavior, multiple ex-girlfriends of Drake Bell's actually came out and said that during their relationships he had been abusive physically and mentally. And one girl who's a TikToker actually claimed that they had started dating when she was 16 and he was obviously way older than her. Something strange I want to add about Drake Bell is that he started making music randomly in Spanish in the year 2019 and even changed his name on Twitter to the name Drake Campaña. He even tweeted in 2019 that his social networks will be only in Spanish from now on and no English. I still couldn't find any real reasoning behind why he made this change, but I thought it's interesting that this was right before all of the allegations against him started to come out.
The girl went missing just hours after taking this selfie. It was June the 6th, 2014 in New York. That evening, 21-year-old Sarah Good was due to go to a party. She was the youngest of 9 siblings and had a big family. She was also the mother to a 4-year-old daughter, and one of her family members had offered to babysit for the evening. It was the first time she'd gone out in a long time, so she was very excited. She posed for this picture before heading to Medford to meet her friends. She had told her family that it was likely to be a late one, so they weren't initially too worried when she didn't return home. They figured that she might have just been letting her hair down and she would return home soon. However, the following day was her nephew's birthday party, and her family knew something was up when she didn't show up to that either. They all started looking for her and reported her missing on the 8th after failing to locate her. Then there was a discovery, and not a positive one. Worryingly, her car was found abandoned a mile away from her home. Then, when investigators took a closer look, they found a bloody handprint on the hood of the car. This triggered a huge response from police and local volunteers. Locals were looking everywhere for the missing girl. Tragically, on the 12th of June, Sarah's body was discovered. She was found in a wooded area, and an autopsy revealed the horrors she had gone through. She had been AR'd and stabbed over 40 times. Police knew they needed to speak to people who were at the party that night. They were trying to place who would be the potential suspects. Police discovered some disturbing tweets that Sarah had posted, apparently referring to her ex and his mum. The ex was called DJ Watters, and she wrote, "So you know I live on a dead end, I see you creeping," on the 1st of June. Then 2 days later, she posted, "Getting threatened for days now, is that the new thing to do?" Investigators also got an anonymous tip that DJ had apparently left a threatening voicemail on Sarah's phone. It's also alleged that his mum rang her and threatened to kill her, and she was so scared by this that she'd reported it to police. Then police were examining phone records and found another suspect. 19-year-old Dante Taylor had been communicating with Sarah via phone. Police took a DNA sample from him and also a palm print to check against the palm print found on the hood of the car. It came back as a positive match, and Dante was arrested and charged with R-ing and murdering her. The prosecution stated at the trial that he had killed her out of anger when she rejected his advances. He was found guilty and sentenced to life. In 2017, he was allegedly attacked in prison by officers. He was found deceased in his jail cell from self-unaliving the same year. What these men did to this defenseless woman is absolutely disgusting. Please be warned that this case is incredibly upsetting. It was the 26th of January 2011 in New South Wales, Australia. Lynette Daly was a 33-year-old mother of 7. She was actually heading to a beach for a camping trip with her boyfriend Adrian Atwater. Along for the ride too was Adrian's friend Paul Maris. They decided to pitch a tent near 10 Mile Beach, which is a fairly isolated area. They figured it would be nice to drink and enjoy the sun in this secluded location. At some point during the trip, Adrian decided to violently R Lynette. It was later proven that she was so intoxicated from the day drinking that she would never have been able to consent. Then Paul also violently R'd Lynette, and she had severe internal and external injuries. For some reason, the pair then decided to bundle Lynette into the car and drive her closer to the water. They dunked her in the sea, and it's unclear as to why they did this, but some believe that they may have been trying to wash the blood off her. Horrifically, in the attack, she lost 2 litres of blood. Now, it wasn't until hours later that Paul decided to call an ambulance, but by that point, she was already dead. An autopsy showed that her cause of death was blunt force G-tract trauma. She had bled out. When questioned by police, the men had decided to fabricate a story. Adrian told police that he hadn't realised Lynette was in that much pain. He also told them that she had gone for a swim and became unconscious in the water. Now, obviously, this may have been a reason that the men dunked her into the water to make their story seem more believable. He claimed that she had consented, but her blood alcohol level was actually found to be dangerously potent. Paul had burned the mattress that Lynette was assaulted on and the clothes that she was wearing. Adrian was charged with manslaughter and Paul was charged with being an accessory. The coroner stated that the story the men had told was inconceivable and dishonest. However, shockingly, the men were not initially prosecuted. The reason given was insufficient evidence. Lynette's children were left without a mother, and these 2 men walked completely free. Finally, in 2016, there was a review of the case. The pair were put on trial for aggravated assault. In 2017, a jury took just half an hour to find them both guilty. Adrian was found guilty of manslaughter and Paul was found guilty of hindering a police investigation for burning the evidence. Adrian got 19 years in prison and Paul got just 9 years. This mother vanished over Thanksgiving. The FBI were able to uncover shocking secrets that no one could have guessed. It was 2018 and Kelsey Bereth was a 29-year-old mother from Colorado. She had a 1-year-old daughter and she was living in Woodland Park. Now, she had a fiancé pictured called Patrick Frazee, but the pair didn't live together. Friends and family described Kelsey as a dedicated mother who would do anything for her child. It was the 22nd of November that year and the family were due to celebrate Thanksgiving. However, Kelsey was last seen on CCTV at a Safeway and was never seen alive again. The timeline is a little bit confusing, but later that day she reportedly met up with Patrick so he could pick up their daughter. Kelsey was apparently due to go back to her job on the 26th of November, but she never did. Her mum reported her missing on the 25th of November after not hearing from her for a while. Patrick reported to police that he had heard from Kelsey that day. Kelsey's boss told police that they had a text of her saying that she was taking some leave. Now, this is all quite odd as it was out of character for her to call off work at late notice and become uncontactable. Then investigators started looking at the obvious things like her phone records. They found that Kelsey's phone had actually pinged off a phone tower in Gooding, Idaho. Now, this was hundreds of miles away from her home, but Kelsey did actually have family in Idaho. There was still hope that she would be found. However, then her family contacted the relatives in Idaho that she had there and discovered she wasn't with any of them. It started to dawn on her loved ones that something might be seriously wrong. Kelsey's brother at this point decided to go round to Kelsey's house to try and piece together any information to try and help find her. He was really confused to find, though, that everything seemed normal. There was no signs that she'd planned to go anywhere, her cars were still at her house, and all of her belongings. Investigators also started wondering why Patrick hadn't reported her missing sooner. As her fiancé and the father of her child, he should have been in the most regular contact with her. Police then brought in the FBI to assist with the search, and months after she vanished, Patrick was arrested. He was charged with first-degree murder and solicitation of first-degree murder. In 2019, police revealed something shocking. Patrick had a mistress named Crystal Kenny. It transpired that Patrick had beaten Kelsey to death after an argument. They were apparently in the middle of breaking up and arguing over child custody. After killing his wife, he then rang his mistress to come and help him clear up. Crystal was working as a nurse at the time and for some reason obliged and came round and helped him mop up the mess. She also helped him burn her body. She actually ended up admitting everything to the police and showing police where they burned the mother of one. Patrick was sentenced to life without parole, but Crystal got just 3 years and is now a free woman.
This woman became so obsessed with true crime that she brutally murdered someone just out of curiosity. This story needs a massive trigger warning as this photo is not what it seems. This is Young Yu Young, a 23-year-old woman described as a recluse who lived with her grandfather in South Korea. Young became so obsessed with true crime TV shows and books that she spent months plotting the murder of a stranger. She finally settled on a victim who was 26 years old and whose name has never been publicly released after contacting 54 other women on a tutoring app. She posed as a mother who was looking for someone to teach her daughter English, and she would message each tutor to see if they taught lessons alone and out of their own home. After contacting 54 other women, she finally found her victim, who did in fact live alone and agreed to help her daughter. So she set up a date in May of this year and arrived to the victim's home in Busan, posing as a young student dressed in a school uniform. And when the victim let her in, she proceeded to stab her over 100 times, most of which occurred after the victim was already dead. Young then went to the store to purchase garbage bags and bleach, and then she returned back to the home where she dismembered the victim. She even cut off her fingers in an attempt to delay identification. Young then stuffed the body parts into suitcases, changed into the victim's clothes, and was seen on CCTV going in and out of the victim's home multiple times with the bloodstained suitcase. She then called a taxi who took her to the Nakdong River, where she dumped some of the remains in a secluded park. In an attempt to make it look like the woman just disappeared, Young also kept her phone, ID, and wallet, and she thought she committed the perfect crime, but she was very wrong. On top of being caught on CCTV leaving the victim's home, Young was also acting very strange in the taxi drive to the river, and the driver even saw the bloodstained suitcase. So they were the one to actually call police and report what they saw, and upon investigating, police discovered a gruesome scene. Many of the woman's body parts were found at the park, but some were also found at Young's home. Authorities also found that her search history consisted of looking up how to kill someone for months leading up to the murder, and she even rented books from the library on how to get rid of a body. Young was soon arrested, but her story changed multiple times. She first told police that she only moved the woman's body after someone else killed her, and then she told them that she actually killed the tutor during an argument. But she ultimately told the police that she murdered the woman out of pure curiosity and just to see what it was like after becoming obsessed with true crime TV shows and books. Young was charged with murder, desecration, and abandonment of a corpse, and prosecutors were originally wanting the death penalty because of how gruesome the crime was. Young pleaded for a more lenient sentence because she said she suffered from hallucinations and other mental health disorders at the time of the murder, but the judge ultimately ruled the murder was very premeditated and carefully planned, and instead she was sentenced to life in prison. In addition to that, she's also ordered to wear a tracking device for 30 years after. This kind of confused me, but from what I can find, those sentenced to life in prison in South Korea become eligible for parole after just 20 years behind bars. So I guess it's a real possibility for Young to be released early.
This video might change your perspective on life.
Hit that water, 225 feet, 25 stories, 75 miles an hour. In 4 seconds, you hit that water. And the impact reverberated through my legs and shattered my T12, L1, and L2. They just popped and splintered inside me. I sat in my room on September 24th writing that note. Only 20% of people who die by suicide actually wrote a note. I wrote that note. Mom, I love you, but you're not always right. Dad, I love you, but stop, stop bringing the office home. This isn't work. I said to my little brother he wanted to be a DJ. He was making mix cassette tapes. And I said to my brother he'd be a household name, you know. And my sister wanted to make films. I said, you got this, go get it, you know. I said to my best friend, Jay Lewis, you'll find another best friend. It's not how it works. And I put the note in my shoulder bag and the shoulder bag by the door. And at 6 in the morning, I entered my dad's room. And he wears a CPAP machine. He woke up and he goes, Kevin, what's wrong? He had known of my unwell behavior, and he'd known I was diagnosed. He'd known I was on meds. I said, nothing, Dad. I just wanted to tell you that I love you. I wanted to tell him, but as I wanted to tell my dad the absolute truth that I was suicidal and that I was going to go to the Golden Gate Bridge and die, a voice in my head said, be quiet, Kevin. This is inevitable. And I listened. And it led me to take a bus to the Golden Gate, crying the entire time, begging myself to tell the one man who loved me the most in the world on the phone that I was sick. I needed help. But I couldn't. Because as I was wanting to tell someone of my pain, the voices were screaming in my head that I had to die. And it wasn't so much that I wanted to die. I believed I had to. What do you do when that happens? And you've never experienced it before. And you've no one to talk to about it, or you feel you have no one to talk to about it. Anyway, it led me to be on that rail. And this woman approaches me from my left, and she had blonde curly hair. She's beautiful, and she goes, "Vil, you take my picture." And that's when I was like, nobody cares. I think today she was actually trying to reach me. She was the only person that engaged, that interacted, that tried to connect. I didn't see it. And the voices won that day. Where 2,000 people have died, I got to live. And I'm grateful for every millisecond I get to walk and breathe. Because I almost couldn't. I hit that water 225 feet, 25 stories, 75 miles an hour. In 4 seconds, you hit that water. And the impact reverberated through my legs and shattered my T12, L1, and L2. They just popped and splintered inside me. And I temporarily lost use of my legs. I went down 70 feet beneath the water surface, and I opened my eyes. And all I wanted to do was live. I swam 70 feet with one breath without the use of my legs as fast as I could. Thinking the entire time, if I die here, no one will ever know I didn't want to. And that's what drove me.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
There's a strange missing persons case happening right now out of Montana, and we should talk about it. This is Renee Arcand. She went missing during a 5-day camping trip near Glendive last June, and the details surrounding her disappearance are still a mystery. Renee was last seen on June 26th of this year at the Fish Intake Campground, which is a really popular paddle fishing site. At the time of her disappearance, she was traveling from Wisconsin, where she was from, to Oregon, and in that last week of June, she decided to stop and camp for a few days in Montana. In the days prior, Renee was working at the Buffalo Gap Guest Ranch in North Dakota, which is about an hour east of Glendive. There she was working with a man who has not yet been publicly identified, and the two decided to camp together at the Fish Intake Campground, which is along the Yellowstone River. According to the man, on the night of June 26th, he, Renee, and her 2 dogs camped out in her dark blue 2011 Toyota Scion. He states that he went to sleep that night in her car with her 2 dogs, and when he woke up the next morning, Renee was gone. Almost all of her personal belongings were left behind, including the car, obviously, and her 2 dogs. But one material item was missing along with Renee, and that was her iPad. According to the man, he then spent the next few days looking for Renee, and he officially reported her missing 3 days later on June 30th. The Dawson County Sheriff's Office immediately started looking for Renee, and they, along with volunteers and Badlands Search and Rescue, have since searched the Yellowstone River and 20 miles around the area where she went missing. Almost every inch of the campground and surrounding areas have been searched, using boats, drones, cadaver dogs, helicopters, and even using sonar equipment. But absolutely no trace of Renee has been found, and it's like she vanished into thin air. The river was reportedly really high at the time and incredibly muddy and deep, and the current was estimated to be roughly 8 miles an hour. The sheriff has stated that it's really rare that someone goes missing in the Yellowstone River, but it does happen. Although they did state that they usually would have been found by now. No witnesses in the area saw Renee go into the river, although at this point, the police assume she did. It's important to note that on August 13th, just 2 months after Renee went missing, human remains were found in the area, but they have since been ruled out and do not belong to Renee. The man who Renee was camping with has reportedly been cooperating with law enforcement, and he did tell authorities his story of what took place. The DCSO has stated that so far the man's story does check out, and whatever reason he gave for having such a big time gap before reporting her missing makes sense. What's strange though is that one of Renee's beloved dogs, a Chihuahua mix named Bean, is also now missing in a separate but related incident. Apparently after Renee went missing, the man she was traveling with kept her dogs, Bean and Zizzy, but as he was driving back to North Dakota just a day after Renee was reported missing, he reportedly let Bean and Zizzy out to go to the bathroom, where they then both ran away. Zizzy was eventually found 15 miles outside of Glendive, but Bean is still missing. He was last seen near the Montana-North Dakota state line. The police still have Renee's car, and authorities have since tried to ping her iPad that is also still missing, but the location was turned off and it no longer has a connection. Workers at the campsite have confirmed that they did in fact see Renee at the campground the night she went missing, but it's now been 6 months, and Renee is still missing. So far, the police have said that this is not a criminal investigation, but the circumstances surrounding Renee's disappearance remain a mystery. Boaters, fishermen, and hunters in the area are asked to keep their eyes open for any clues. And if you were by chance camping at the Fish Intake Campground the week of June 26th, please try to remember if you might have seen Renee or her car. Renee is described as being 5'5", 150 pounds, and has brown hair and hazel eyes. She also has a tattoo on her wrist that says, "This too will pass." If you have any information at all, please contact the Dawson County Sheriff's Office at 406-377-5291.
This case is just absolutely heartbreaking. Trigger warning, some of the details are quite graphic. This is 15-year-old Sebastian Kalinowski. In 2020, he'd recently moved from Poland, where he lived with his father, to Huddersfield in West Yorkshire to live with his mother Agnieszka and her partner Andrzej. What this couple did to this young boy is just absolutely horrific. From the moment he went to live with them, he was forced to call Andrzej Sir and was subjected to regular humiliating drills, which consisted of push-ups, press-ups, squats, and he was also regularly injected with needles that Andrzej had used himself to inject steroids. Despite the horrific abuse at home, Sebastian was described by his teachers at school as a model student. He was polite, well-mannered, his English was improving, and he'd made lots of new friends. They had no idea that he was being abused at home. On August 13th, 2021, just 3 weeks into the summer holidays, and only 10 months after he'd moved to England, paramedics were called to Sebastian's home, and they found him unconscious. He'd actually been out cold for hours before help was called. It soon became quite obvious that Sebastian had fallen ill due to untreated injuries. He had multiple broken ribs, which had been left untreated and caused sepsis. Sadly, it was too late to save him, and he died the same day. An investigation into Sebastian's death began, and CCTV was recovered from the house. Sebastian had been forced to live an absolute nightmare in this house for months on end. The CCTV was thought to have been set up by Andre as a way of controlling Sebastian, and it uncovered months of abuse. He had suffered so much at the hands of his mother and stepfather. Videos showed numerous incidents where Sebastian had been punched, kicked and stamped on. In one video, he was seen being whipped with an electrical cable and being repeatedly stabbed with needles. And at one point, his mother had picked him up by the neck and thrown him to the floor. He was also beaten with a bed slat and a broken chair leg. On the day of Sebastian's death, Andre was seen forcing food and drink into Sebastian's mouth before stabbing him repeatedly with a needle in the thigh and groin. It was also clear in that video that Sebastian was incredibly weak and he was struggling for breath. Just hours later, he was dead. The evidence against these two monsters was absolutely overwhelming, but despite that, they both pleaded not guilty to murder. Agnieszka pleaded guilty to child cruelty and Andre pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Despite that, the jury found them both guilty after a 5-week trial at Leeds Crown Court, and they were both sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 39 years, plus 9 years for child cruelty. This case has literally shocked me to the core. The fact that this can happen while you're just laid asleep in bed is just absolutely horrifying. Trigger warning, some of the details are extremely graphic. Kimberly Cates and her 11-year-old daughter Jamie were fast asleep on the night of October 2nd, 2009. They were completely unaware that 4 teenagers had broken into their house with knives and machetes, intent on murder. 19-year-old Stephen Spader, a high school dropout, had formed a club with 3 friends called the Disciples of Destruction. He'd told his friends Christopher, William and Quinn that they had to be initiated into the club, and to do that they had to join him in entering someone's house and killing everybody inside. They chose the Cates home at random, completely unaware that David was actually away on a business trip and that Kimberly and Jamie were alone, asleep upstairs. They broke in through a small downstairs window and made their way upstairs with their machetes and knives. They found Kimberly and Jamie asleep in the bedroom and began their attack. Stephen and Christopher started raining down blows on both Kimberly and Jamie. Just a quick trigger warning again here because the next bit is pretty graphic. Kimberly was hit 32 times. Her skull was split open, her left eye socket destroyed, several organs were pierced, her bones were shattered, and her throat was slit. Despite her injuries, Kimberly shouted to her daughter, telling her everything was going to be okay, before finally succumbing to the massive blood loss and passing away. 11-year-old Jamie was struck 18 times. The blows severed part of her left foot, split her skull open, and shattered her jaw. Jamie actually played dead until the boys left, and then she struggled to the kitchen and dialed 911. Miraculously, she actually survived. The boys dumped their bloody clothes in a river after the attack and then went home to bed. But the next day, they went to a friend's house and started bragging about the attack. The friend's mum actually overheard part of the conversation and went to the police fearing that her son might be involved. All 4 teenage boys were soon arrested and their trials began. It was determined that Stephen top left and Christopher top right were the ones that had attacked Kimberly and Jamie. William, bottom right, had actually stood in the bedroom doorway and witnessed the attack, while Quinn Glover, bottom left, had waited in the living room. Stephen Spader showed absolutely no remorse over the killing of Kimberly. He did it for fun, and if it hadn't been Kimberly, it would have been someone else. He was sentenced to life without parole for the murder of Kimberly and 76 years for the attempted murder of Jamie. At Christopher Gribble's trial, he actually admitted that if he'd realised Jamie was still alive, he would have made sure she was dead. He also said that he was the one that slit Kimberly's throat. He was sentenced to life without parole. William Marks was sentenced to 30 to 60 years for being an accomplice to murder, and he'll be eligible for parole in 2039. Quinn Glover was sentenced to 20 to 40 years for burglary, robbery and conspiracy, and he'll be eligible for parole in 6 years' time. Jamie bravely appeared in court to see her attackers sentenced, accompanied by her father David. They now hold a golf tournament every year on the anniversary of Kimberly's death to raise money for the Kim Cates Scholarship Fund, which helps college students with their expenses.
This little girl was kidnapped in 2018 and has just been found. On the 25th of October 2018, 4-year-old Aranza Lopez was on a supervised visit with her biological mum. Her mum, Esmeralda, was being investigated over abuse allegations, so Aranza was actually in foster care at the time. It was arranged that the pair would have a supervised visit at a Washington shopping centre. However, during the visit, Esmeralda requested to take Aranza to the toilets and used the opportunity to snatch the little girl in a stolen vehicle. The FBI were notified and a huge search for Aranza and even advertised a $10,000 reward. It wasn't until a year later that Esmeralda was found and arrested, but there was still no sign of the little girl. That was until last month. She was recovered by Mexican authorities in February in western Mexico. In 2021, Esmeralda was actually extradited back to Washington state and pled guilty to second-degree kidnapping and robbery. She was sentenced to 20 months in prison. This woman screamed, "I don't want to die," as she was dragged to her death in a horrifying theme park incident. Kelty Byrne was a Canadian student animal trainer and competitive swimmer. She was working at Sealand of the Pacific to earn extra money, and this involved being trained to work with orcas, otherwise known as killer whales. In controversial theme parks such as Sealand of the Pacific and SeaWorld, huge animals are either bred in captivity or traumatically captured and ripped apart from their families and natural habitats for humans' entertainment. On February the 20th, 1991, Kelty was working a shift and 3 whales were in one of the pools, including the infamous Tilikum. In a horrific turn of events, Kelty accidentally slipped and fell into the whale pool and attempted to grab onto the edge and save herself. However, before she could do so, she was grabbed by one of the whales that dragged her into the pool. The 3 whales then began throwing Kelty around, with many speculating that they may have simply thought this was a game. Others theorised that the whales were so traumatised and angered by their lives in tiny little pools that they took it out on Kelty. She was dragged under the water and then back up, screaming, "I don't want to die." After this horrific ordeal, she eventually drowned. It's reported that she was absolutely covered in bruises, was completely battered, and also covered in teeth marks. If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked round her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges, including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know. This is one of the most disgusting and evil cases I've heard of recently. On the 7th of December 2017, teacher Telma Boynville was desperately trying to make some extra money. She was doing a cleaning job to earn extra money for her family, and the job suited her as her 8-year-old could come along and play while she worked. This was really handy as it meant she didn't have to fork out for childcare. She set out cleaning some holiday homes on the day in question, and her daughter waited in the car. The spot was a lovely scenic place called Kelky Beach. However, instead of walking in on a normal holiday rental to clean, she walked into a nightmare. Stephen Brown and his girlfriend Hayley Dangerand were in the middle of robbing the place. They were scouring through drawers and wardrobes, hunting for valuables to steal. With Telma walking in, their plan had been foiled. They decided they needed to dispose of their only witness. The evil pair tied up the mother, whose daughter waited unsuspectingly in the car outside. They used a machete, a knife, and a hammer to murder the innocent woman. But the horror was far from over. They exited the holiday home and came across Telma's young daughter waiting in the car. They callously told the young girl, "We killed your mum," and then bound her up and gagged her. Sickeningly, they then took the 8-year-old into the home where they'd killed her mum and left her there tied up. The 2 Australian tourists who were renting the holiday home then came back and found the crime scene. The 2 killers were tracked down hours later in Telma's car, which they'd stolen and driven off in. Hayley was actually wearing her victim's earrings at the time. They actually begged for the officers to just shoot them and end their lives, but they wouldn't get away that easily. Telma's husband Kevin wasn't actually allowed to see his wife's body due to the extent of her injuries. The autopsy revealed that she'd fought for her life, with many defensive wounds indicating a struggle. Since the murder, Stephen and Hayley have both tried to blame each other. Stephen was found guilty of second-degree murder and apparently showed no emotion as the verdict was read out. Hayley is currently awaiting trial. This little girl got revenge on her killer from beyond the grave. On the 25th of January 2005, Katie Coleman finished school and went back to her home in Indiana, United States. Katie was 10 years old and lived with her mum and dad and sister. At 3 p.m. that day, her mum asked her to go to the dollar store to get toilet roll. Now, Katie knew the area well and it wasn't really far to go. After getting the toilet roll from the shop, Katie stopped at the bank to get a lollipop for her way home. However, when Katie's dad returned home, the little girl still wasn't back. Her parents called police and a few days later an Amber Alert was issued. A witness came forward to say that they'd seen a girl who looked like Katie in a truck. The driver was described as a skinny white man about 6 feet tall with short dark hair and fair complexion. Tragically, 5 days after going missing, Katie's body was found. It was in a creek just a few miles from her home. Disturbingly, her hands and feet were tied and she had been SA'd. It was determined that her cause of death had been drowning. 20-year-old Charles Hickman rang the police to confess. He said he and another man had abducted Katie after she'd witnessed a substance deal. He said they tried to scare her into not saying anything and they tied her up, but she ended up falling in and drowning. Disgustingly, this turned out to be a false confession. This obviously wasted police time and caused massive amounts of distress to Katie's family. Police continued to look for evidence and they did find a cigarette butt near to Katie's body. They tested it for DNA and it matched a man called Anthony Stockelman. Police compared the DNA on the cigarette butt to the DNA on Katie's body and it was a match. Anthony, a father of 2 young boys, was in the area that day visiting his mother. He entered a guilty plea and was given life in prison without parole. But this is not the only punishment that Anthony would receive. Now, Anthony claims that he was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance during the crime. He said this is because his father had died 6 months prior. Regardless, Anthony was imprisoned. Unlucky for Anthony, he was actually housed in a prison with Katie's cousin. Jared Harris was serving a sentence for burglary and was in the same wing as Anthony. Jared forcibly tattooed the words "Katie's Revenge" across Anthony's forehead. He wanted to brand Anthony for life for killing his young cousin. Killer accidentally admitted to his crimes by accident when he forgot he was wearing a microphone while taking part in a documentary. This is how a true crime documentary exposed a killer. In 1971, Robert Durst met Kathleen McCormack and they got married. At the time of her disappearance in 1982, Kathleen had nearly graduated college. She was last seen by a witness at a dinner party where she appeared to be upset. She got a call from Robert and left. Robert admitted to having argued with Kathleen that night, but he said he put her on a train to New York and then never saw her again. Her friend called police to report her missing. Interestingly, Kathleen had been treated at a medical centre for facial bruises weeks prior to this and told the friend that Robert had done it. Robert had actually been dating someone else for some time prior to this and had been living separately to Kathleen. When her family broke into her cottage to try and find out where she was, they found the place had been trashed and her possessions put in the bin. Kathleen's family always believed that Robert was involved in her disappearance. In 2000, Susan Berman, a friend of Robert's, was found murdered. Now, she'd actually provided Robert with an alibi for Kathleen's disappearance. Now, pay really close attention to this next bit. Days after she was killed, a letter addressed to the Beverly Hills Police Department contained Susan's address and the word cadaver on it. On the envelope, Beverly was misspelled. Robert admitted in 2005 that Susan had called him shortly before her death to say that the police wanted to question her about Kathleen going missing. It's believed that Robert killed Susan to keep her quiet. In 2001, Robert's neighbour's body parts were found floating in Galveston Bay. Robert's elderly neighbour, Morris Black, had been killed and Robert was arrested. He was actually released on bail and fled and was found about a month later in Pennsylvania. He was found with $37,000 cash, 2 weapons, and interestingly, Morris Black's driving license. In court, Robert claimed he was acting in self-defense. He said he'd accidentally shot Morris and dismembered his body. Due to lack of forensics, he only got 5 years in jail. This is where things get really crazy. HBO was filming a documentary called The Jinx. During production, Susan's stepson found a letter written by Robert. This contained the same spelling error in the word Beverly as the anonymous letter to police. This implicated Robert in the murder. Now, while filming the documentary, Robert needed the toilet. He forgot that he had a microphone still attached to him. He was recorded talking to himself. He said, "There it is, you're caught. You're right, of course, but you can't imagine. Arrest him." And then he said, "What a disaster. He was right. I was wrong." And finally he said, "I'm having difficulty with the question. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course."
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
Sick woman has been nicknamed the nanny from hell. And the stories of her abuse are sickening. Let me tell you, viewer discretion is heavily advised for this TikTok. So this is Nicole Lynn Walter. She was 27 years old when she was arrested and she's from Florida. And between 2017 and 2018, she abused the children that she was nannying. The kids were only 3 years old and 15 years old, and she had been charging her clients online different rates, more expensive and less expensive, for the different types of abuse she was carrying out on these kids. Now, when investigators interviewed the 3-year-old that Nicole had been nannying, she said that Nicole, her nanny, had been, behaving inappropriately with her, and she told investigators that Nicole had been touchy with her privates. Now, when investigators got a search warrant and executed it on Nicole's home, they found a micro SD card that contained disgusting, according to them, vile images of a minor. Images that Nicole had taken herself. They also found video files on Nicole's computer that showed her completely bare in front of the children that she had been nannying, talking to the kids while she was playing with herself, if you know what I'm talking about. As in, she was toying with herself while she was talking to the kids she was nannying right there on camera. I mean, how disturbing can the story get? When pressed about all of this, Nicole told investigators that she recorded, uploaded, and sold this content to clients on the internet who were requesting her to make these sorts of sick and twisted videos. Now, keep in mind, Nicole was also uploading adult videos and images of herself to the internet and charging for them without the kids involved. But like we said at the beginning, if there were kids involved, she would charge clients extra based on what they wanted. So this is a sick story. This is a very sick individual. And this once again goes to show that it's not only men who can be pedophiles, it can be anybody. And sometimes these people don't look at all like what you would expect them to.
A man got extremely suspicious texts of his ex before she vanished. Then the house she was last seen in went up in flames. Brooklyn Farthing was an 18-year-old girl living in Berea, Kentucky. In June 2013, she had graduated from high school and she was excited for the future. She was really talented at doing hair and makeup, and her family thinks she potentially wanted to go into hair and beauty. She was incredibly outgoing and was loved by so many. On the 21st of June, Brooklyn and her sister Paige did their driving tests. Brooklyn passed hers, but unfortunately her sister Paige didn't. Later that day, the pair of them went to their granddad's birthday party and the whole family went. Then Brooklyn and Paige went to another party with their cousin. At around 7 p.m. that evening, Brooklyn decided to stay at the party while Paige and the cousin left. It's believed that Brooklyn got into an argument with a friend because the friend wanted to stay at a boy's house. Brooklyn was reportedly seen leaving the party then with 2 men. This was a guy called Josh Hensley and another unidentified male. It was early in the morning of the 22nd of June that they apparently dropped the unknown male off at his house. Brooklyn and Josh then went back to Josh's place. Strangely, Josh's home had no running water or electrics. At around 4 a.m, Brooklyn had rang her sister to try and get a lift home. However, due to the fact that they'd all been to parties that evening, they were unable to get a lift because the person driving the car had been drinking. Brooklyn then rang her ex and asked if he could come and get her, and he agreed to pick her up at around 7 a.m. She then texted, "Can you hurry?" Then, "Please hurry." Then, "I'm scared." Around an hour later, she then sent a text saying, "Never mind, I'm okay, I'm going to a party in Rockcastle County." No one ever heard from her again. There was also no record of this party at Rockcastle County. At around 7 a.m, Josh rang the fire service to report his house being up in flames. He told officers that Brooklyn was inside the house when the fire began. The fire service found that actually the only area that was burnt was the sofa and the area around it. Brooke and her phone were nowhere to be seen. Josh had told police that he'd popped out to check on his horses, and when he came back, the fire had begun. 2 days later, Brooklyn's phone pinged off a tower in Blue Lick for the last time. Now, disgustingly, Josh was later arrested for possessing CSA images. Brooklyn's case remains unsolved, and her family have no closure or justice in this case.
This is the sinkhole incident, one of the worst deaths imaginable, explained. This was Jeffrey Bush, who lived in Florida. And he lived in a home with his brother, his sister-in-law, and his niece. The house was built in the 1970s, and there was never any indication that there was anything wrong with the house. But on the night of February 28th, 2013, Jeffrey Bush was sleeping in his room when all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, Jeffrey's brother Jeremy heard his brother screaming. They heard him screaming for help and also heard some really loud crashing noises. And when Jeremy got to the room and looked inside, Jeffrey was gone. His bed was gone, his dresser was gone, his TV was gone, because a massive sinkhole opened up in Jeffrey's room and swallowed everything inside. At the time, Jeremy said the sinkhole was about 20 feet wide and roughly 6 to 7 feet deep. And Jeremy, not thinking of anything, just jumped into the hole to see if he could find his brother. He said he thought he heard his brother calling his name and screaming for help, but he couldn't actually see Jeffrey anywhere. It was just a dark chasm with Jeffrey's furniture and water pouring in everywhere. Within minutes, firefighters and rescue workers were there. And because sinkholes are so unpredictable, the rescuers just pulled Jeremy out immediately. And they all then left the house. In fact, the sinkhole was still crumbling. The first thing the rescue team did was get a microphone and put it onto a string, and they then put it into the sinkhole to see if they could hear any sounds of life. But they didn't hear a thing. But as they were doing this, the sinkhole collapsed again, and at that point it spread to be about 30 feet wide and about 20 feet deep, which is just crazy. There was no safe way of trying to see if they can even save Jeffrey Bush's life, or recover a body if he was dead. I don't know, and they don't know how long he survived, but based on the fact that he was screaming for help, means he was likely alive for a few minutes before being crushed to death or suffocating. It was literally impossible to get his body. They then tore down the home and built a fence around where the sinkhole is, and then poured it with a bunch of asphalt, burying Jeffrey forever. They also said there's a slim chance his body could get picked up by a nearby waterway, but it's extremely unlikely. 2 years later, the sinkhole reopened and they then had to demolish all the homes around it. This death is absolutely terrifying, and may Jeffrey Bush rest in peace.
This little boy went missing 6 years ago, but he was just found alive walking down a dark road in France. This story is actually insane. This is Alex Batty. He was 11 years old when he went missing during what was supposed to be a 2-week family vacation to Spain, but the details surrounding his disappearance are odd. In 2017, Alex was living with his grandma, who was his legal guardian in Oldham, England. His dad left when he was 2 years old, and ever since he was raised by his mom Melanie and his grandma, who eventually took over guardianship. Alex's grandma agreed agreed to let him go on a vacation with his mom and grandpa to Spain, but that was 6 years ago, and that was the last time that she ever saw him. His disappearance became widely known, but there was literally no trace of him. But just last week, Alex, who was now 17, was found walking down the road in the middle of the night near the city of Toulouse in France. A delivery driver spotted him walking alone in the rain with a flashlight, backpack, and skateboard, and he offered him a ride. Alex agreed, and once he got in the car, he initially gave the driver a fake name, but ultimately he told him that his real name was Alex Batty and that he was kidnapped by his mom 5 years ago in Morocco. Alex told him that he had walked for 4 days and 4 nights through the rugged Pyrenees, sleeping in the light and hiking in the dark, trying to get to a big city to seek out authorities. He said that to survive, he ate what he could find in fields and gardens. He then stated that he'd been living a nomadic lifestyle in Spain, Morocco, and most recently France with his mom and grandpa as part of a spiritual community. He said that they would never stay in one place for too long, would grow their own food, they meditated, and contemplated reincarnation. According to Alex, he carpooled with a community of about 10 people doing odd jobs to get by, and they would carry solar panels with them for energy. It was only after his mom said that she wanted everyone to move to Finland that Alex decided he wanted to leave the group. He told the driver that picked him up that he had had enough and that he was 17 and needed a future, but that he couldn't see a future there. The driver took him to the police after looking him up online and finding out that he was indeed a missing child. Authorities then notified Alex's grandma that he was found, which she's obviously very excited about. According to her, Alex disappeared in 2017 because of disagreements over his care, and the fact that his mom and grandpa were interested in pursuing an alternative lifestyle with him. Alex told authorities that he was never physically abused, but that he had not attended school in the past 6 years, and he was reportedly in good health when he was found. Alex has since been reunited with his grandma. As for his mom Melanie, she is currently wanted by British police in connection to his disappearance, and she may be in Finland. His grandpa David is believed to have died about 6 months ago. Manchester police are still investigating the circumstances around Alex's disappearance and whether or not there should be a criminal investigation. What do you guys think about this case?
This is the skydiving incident, one of the worst deaths imaginable, explained. This is 18-year-old Tyler Turner, who just graduated high school. In 2016, Tyler and a group of his friends wanted to experience a thrill. So they all decided to go skydiving for the first time. And unfortunately for Tyler, it would be his first and his last. This was a video taken moments before Tyler went skydiving.
My name is Tyler Turner. What they doing here? I am gonna jump out of a plane. It's your first time. First time indeed. His mom Francine was there to see him off. That's my mom. Hello, very loving mom. Don't want me in my life. Or that she'll help me with more of my life because I want to make it.
That video is the final time Tyler would ever talk to his mom. The plane went up in the air and one by one people were jumping out of it. Tyler would be doing a tandem skydive with this instructor. Later, it would come out that he wasn't even certified and all of his documents were forged. Tyler's mother was waiting 13,000 feet below, waiting for her son to come down. Tyler and his instructor jumped out of the plane, and all his mother really could see is just tiny dots in the sky. But the more and more people that come down, she still hasn't seen her son. As Tyler and his instructor were coming down to the earth, the worst possible thing happened. The instructor pulled the ripcord, but the parachute didn't come out. The backup parachutes didn't work either. All of the parachutes failed. And I could assume when this happened, both of them started to panic. They were falling at roughly 200 feet per second, which is insane. And that means without a parachute, it would take 70 to 80 seconds to fall down to the earth. Which for them, I imagine felt like hours and hours. And all while this is happening, Tyler's mother is still looking up in the air, waiting for her son. And because of the freefall aspect, they have gone off course. So they were no longer falling in the exact area they were supposed to. About a minute to a minute and a half later after they jumped out of the plane, and at roughly 100 to 120 miles per hour, they crashed into the earth. I couldn't find any autopsy report about their death, but all I could hope is they had some sort of heart failure before they hit the ground, because experiencing that must be absolutely horrific. Tyler's mother filed a lawsuit against the skydiving company and she won $40 million for her son's death. But sadly, she is forever without her son. This is just so sad because before Tyler went skydiving, he literally said in the video that he was scared and he hopes he makes it. And his mother was there when this all happened. I can't imagine the pain she was feeling, and may Tyler Turner rest in peace.
Family of this deceased woman continued to get texts off her after she died. Monica Moynan was a 22-year-old mother of 2 from North Carolina. She was living in Holly Springs in April 2019 when she vanished. She had a boyfriend at the time, 44-year-old Brian Sluss, who was the father of her 2 children. It was quite normal for Monica to speak to her mum on the phone every couple of weeks, so her mum started to get a little concerned when she hadn't heard from her via the phone. The only thing she was receiving were text messages. Between April and June that year, she was only able to communicate with Monica via text. This was unusual as they, as I said, did regular voice calls. In July, someone else raised a concern. Monica's apartment manager had actually rang Monica's mum to express concern about her whereabouts. They'd only seen Brian at the apartments rather than Monica. It sparked their suspicions and they raised a call with police to do a welfare check. Police tried to locate Monica but failed to do so. She was recorded as a missing person. Brian was confronted by police who wanted to know when he'd last seen her. He was adamant that he'd seen her in June, but he said she had addiction issues and had run away. At this point, Brian made a worrying confession. He claimed that he'd been sending texts pretending to be Monica, and he did this because he didn't want to worry Monica's mum. He said he couldn't bear to tell her that Monica had addiction issues and had run away of her own accord. Then there was even more cause for concern. Police searched Monica's apartment and found evidence that a clean-up had occurred. Floor tiles had been removed and forensics experts took a closer look. They found that human blood had been cleaned from in between the tiles. They sent off swabs to the lab and found the blood was a match for Monica. Police also found evidence that Monica could have been pregnant at the time that she vanished. Now we know statistically being pregnant makes you more likely to be killed at the hands of a partner. Brian and his ex-wife Jarlyn were named as persons of interest. In 2020, Brian was charged with Monica's murder. Jarlyn was also charged with obstruction of justice and accessory to the murder after the fact. Brian defended himself in the murder trial and claimed she left of her own accord and denied any knowledge of what happened. However, it was also revealed in court that Brian used Monica's phone and created Facebook pages for her under her name. He also sent texts to her family to try and keep up the pretense that she was still alive. The shocked jurors were then shown horrific footage of Brian punching his 4-year-old child. This footage was captured on a nanny cam. He was found guilty of first-degree murder with special circumstances of DV. Monica's body has still never been found. Brian was given life in prison. This true crime case will make your blood boil. Over a decade ago, 19-year-old Cara Nichols vanished. The teenager was born and raised in Colorado Springs and unfortunately had begun using substances throughout high school. She was reported missing on the 14th of October 2012. At this point, her roommates hadn't heard from her for 5 days. Police soon learned that she'd actually spoken to her brother on the phone on the 9th of October at around 11:45 p.m. She told him that she was on her way to a modelling shoot. The next day, unsettlingly, her phone was going straight to answer phone. It was actually her brother that ended up travelling to her apartment to figure out what was going on. He spoke to her roommates and the alarm was raised. Now, Cara's laptop was actually still at her apartment, which was concerning because if she just decided to up and left, she wouldn't have left her laptop behind. When investigators started digging into the case, they found that Cara had been placing ads as an S-worker. Interestingly, she'd actually posted an ad with her phone number on it the same day she went missing. Police also found out that her phone had been used on that day too at almost midnight. Investigators started looking into exactly which numbers she'd received calls from and set about contacting the individuals. They got a return call of Joel Hollendorfer. He admitted to police that yes, he had spoke to the girl about S services, but they'd never ended up meeting. However, when police tracked Cara's phone, her last activity was in the area of Joel's parents' house. Police ended up searching at the property with a cadaver dog. Disturbingly, the dog barked in loads of different areas on the property to indicate remains. However, the owner of the property stated that this must be just because they have a lot of animals and over the years the animals die and then they bury them in the back garden. The police were happy with this explanation and gave up on the search. They also, though, decided to interview Joel's wife, who strangely declined to cooperate with the investigation. Frustratingly, Cara's case went cold. On February the 8th, 2022, a decade after she went missing, police confirmed that they had found Cara's body. It was on that property they'd searched the whole time. Joel was obviously arrested. In February 2022, his wife decided to come clean to police. She told them that Joel had told her in 2014 that he accidentally killed an escort that he'd hired. He admitted that he accidentally strangled her to death and buried her near a dead horse on the property. Joel's defense in court claimed that he accidentally killed her in an S-act gone wrong and that she lost consciousness due to substance use. Shockingly, he was only convicted of manslaughter and got just 24 years in prison. This was a huge blow to Kara's family.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
These two 12-year-old girls tried to stab and kill their friend in the name of Slender Man. This is the story of the Slender Man stabbing, and viewer discretion is advised. This is a disturbing tale. So meet Anissa Wire and Morgan Geyser. These two 12-year-old girls are from Wisconsin. And growing up, they were obsessed with the character of Slender Man. Now, if you don't know who Slender Man is, he is a fictional character that supposedly targets children, and he oftentimes hides out in forests. As a child, Morgan Geyser, pictured here, had exhibited strange behaviors. She frequently hallucinated, claimed that she was seeing colors melting down walls and ghosts in her house, and eventually she became, along with her best friend Anissa, obsessed with the tale of Slender Man. Now, these are some drawings taken from Morgan's notebook that investigators eventually recovered, but they were obsessed with Slender Man. Morgan drew him on every page in the book. She depicted Slender Man loving and hugging her, and it was apparent that the two girls were obsessed with the mythology behind this fake character. Now, Morgan and Anissa were great friends with Peyton, pictured right here, but Peyton wasn't in on the Slender Man thing. And eventually the two girls got convinced that they needed to appease Slender Man somehow. And how did Slender Man want to be appeased? Well, with a blood sacrifice of their friend. So on May 31st, 2014, Morgan and Anissa lured Peyton out to the middle of the woods. They said that they wanted to play a game of hide and seek, but what Peyton didn't know was that they were planning on murdering her. So Morgan and Anissa had brought things to the woods with them, including a knife. And when they got out to a super secluded area, they pinned Peyton down and stabbed her 19 times. Keep in mind, these are 12-year-old girls we're talking about. They stabbed her in the arms, leg, and torso and punctured her liver and stomach. These two girls then told their friend that they would leave her to go find some help after attacking her, but they left the woods and left her for dead. Apparently, these two were convinced that after they murdered their friend, a portal would open up in the middle of the forest, Slender Man would come out, and he would take them to Slender Man's mansion. But obviously, they never found Slender Man, and they were eventually found by the police. You see, Peyton, being as strong as she had, even after being stabbed 19 times, got up and dragged herself to a nearby road where she was discovered by a cyclist. Now, when people found out the details behind this crime, this was a national news story. It was so incredibly shocking. Two young girls trying to curry the favor of Slender Man had stabbed their friend almost to death. But even though they thought they had murdered their friend Peyton, she was still alive. Now, eventually, Morgan was given a 40 years to life prison sentence, and she is serving that out at a mental institution. She was also given 3 years minimum in locked solitary confinement. And shockingly, Anissa was just released in 2021. She's on probation right now, but she's out living her life wherever she is. There's so much more to this story, but it's just shocking how two 12-year-old girls could actually target their best friend, the third member of their group, and stab her and leave her to die in the middle of the woods. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard a story quite like this. And if you want to hear more true crime stories, be sure to check out the podcast that my wife and I co-host called Murder in America, available on all streaming platforms.